This is Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College with Macon Memories. Today is March the 4th, 2009, and I'm here with Ed Cox and John Conkright.
I'm John Conkright, and I'm currently the Executive Assistant to the President at Randolph-Macon. I came to Randolph-Macon almost 29 years ago in 1980, hired, fortunately, by my compatriot here, Ed Cox, as Associate Director of Admissions in 1980, and have since then been the Director of Admissions, the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid, and for the last 2.5 years, the Executive Assistant to the President. And it's been a wonderful experience, which I hope to elaborate on.
I'm Ed Cox. I'm an old Ashland boy, born and raised. Came to Randolph-Macon as a student in 1950. Graduated in 1954 as an English major. Went into the military service, of course, and then into the wonderful world of education, and bounced around a little and wound up being invited to come back to Randolph-Macon in 1966 as registrar and assistant director of admissions at the point in time when the registrar's office and the admissions office were separated from each other and put under different leadership. And then 2 years later, when Bill Robertson left, I became the director of admissions and was in that role until 1981 when I departed.
I just was going to add a question. Ed, as we know, the admissions role has changed dramatically over the years from kind of a gatekeeper in the early days when you wore the hats of registrar and admissions to one of kind of the key marketeer for the college. Can you talk a little bit about how that role changed during your tour of duty here from kind of the keeper of the gate to the marketer of the institution?
My line on that usually is that in that period of time, all colleges' admissions offices were expanding greatly, and my line is that we thought very seriously about we sailed right through educational experiences into marketing and never blinked an eye, and we were then out on the road. We expanded the staff in the admissions office, and we were having a lot of fun traveling around with a lot of other admissions officers, John, as you know well, yes. And visiting lots of schools and putting out lots of publications and so forth. And the operation expanded considerably during that period of time.
And it continued to expand during my time here
I'm
exponentially.
sure
Just amazing, not just in terms of what we had to do and how we had to market the college, but what was going on around us in terms of the intense competition, both from the publics and the private institutions in Virginia.
Right.
Depending on the demographics, either an upturn in the number of students available or probably more than not, a downturn in the number of students available, certainly something that we're looking at right now. So the pressure was intense to market the best features of Randolph-Macon College and not simply sit behind a desk and wait for applications to come across. And with the advent of technology and e-applications and so forth, the whole role and profile of admissions changed dramatically in terms of using available technology for outreach from the internet to email and so forth. That's just a dramatic change that I experienced and accelerated even more over probably the last 5 or 10 years of my tour of duty and admissions. I stopped as dean in 2006, and it was a transformation of admissions during that time. Probably accelerated, probably even more in many ways than what Ed saw.
And I'm overjoyed that I left before the internet arrived, but because we did not have to deal with all those kinds of applications and that whole process. Or non-process as it is.
But the one thing I would say is that probably the same things that were rewarding to Ed during his time here continue to be the rewards that we experienced in later years of administering the admissions program. When people ask, what were the most satisfying points? Was it the year you brought in the record class or whatever? I would say that was almost a byproduct. I mean, it was nice and a relief that you brought in the class, but what stimulated and kept Ed in the saddle is the same thing that worked for me and the staffs that I dealt with, energetic students and parents, Ed mentioned the wonderful colleagues that we met on the road, other admissions deans and directors, and what kind of a fraternity it was when we traveled around the state and the eastern seaboard, and how we knew people and could rely on them for information and support and so forth. So I think in admissions, we were attracted and stimulated by the same things that students are stimulated by when they come here, and that is the sense of community, the personal interaction, the relationships, the things that we, Randolph-Macon has changed in many ways, facilities-wise and so forth. But the one thing that I always say, and Ed may disagree, the essence of Randolph-Macon from whenever Ed started in 1966 until today is this sense of community, this sense of humanity, and it's almost an intangible quality about Randolph-Macon that students who come here feel, students who work here feel, and I don't think that has changed. The fundamental essence of Randolph-Macon has not changed, at least in the 29 years that I have been here.
I fully agree with that. I will add one thing. It's also the sense of independence that a student has here, or has always seemed to have here. They don't feel like they have to be a part of a particular group or a particular kind of person. We're not the preppy kind, and everything. And because students would feed that back to me a great deal, and then also prospective students who were making the decision to come here would feed that back to me. And
Absolutely.
I've got my stories about admission have to do with the people.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Individual by individual by individual, and that's the way we got our numbers.
Yep,
right.
Absolutely.
Oh, my gosh. You don't want me to start on my list? Well, one that I just happened to remember again this morning was there was a student from a Fairfax County high school, a young man, who was a good student, good, all the criteria were there and so forth. He was president of the student body. He was active in everything in his school. He was the leader of everything and so forth. And he came and he interviewed with me. We went through all this and so forth. And we admitted him, of course, and he came and he joined no extracurricular group while he was here. He may have joined a fraternity, but he did not participate in extracurricular activities, and he loved it. He loved it. And on graduation day, after the ceremony, his dad, whom I had met in the process, came up to me and thanked me so much for convincing his student to come here. And Dad was standing there, had this little brown bag in his hand, which he handed to me and said, "We just want to give you this to thank you so much for bringing our son here, because what a wonderful experience he had. His delicious bottle of scotch that he gave me as a thank you gift." Right, at this Methodist college, of course. But
one of the questions I know that's being considered is how has the admissions process changed over time with the shift in demographics and the intense pressures to compete with other institutions and so forth. And I guess in some fundamental ways it probably hasn't changed all that much, and that is and I speak for myself, but probably Ed would echo this, I think today we did the same thing that we did in 1980 or 1966, and that is we look at students who we believe can be successful in a rigorous academic program at Randolph-Macon College, and those are the students that we take a chance on. There's nothing artificial or mechanical about the process. Oh, yeah. In a year where we're down in numbers, we may have to opt for a few more risky students and so forth, but the bottom line from kind of an ethical point of view has always been, at least in my time here, can this student succeed? If the answer is yes, we will take a chance on them, whether they have modest SATs or whatever. If they have redeeming qualities and predict success, we will take a chance on them. And of course, in the great years where you can be more selective, we didn't have to take some of the end of the process risks and so forth. But fundamentally, if a student couldn't be successful, it's just kind of our ethical responsibility to find an alternative for them or to allow them to seek their success elsewhere. And that probably hasn't changed a whole lot in spite of how high-tech we've gotten.
That's what my little stories, yes. Okay.
These are all setups for Ed's stories, so
yes,
go ahead, Ed.
Who came to interview, and we all had all of his whole application process thing, all the papers, and he had reasonably good grades in a pretty good schedule of courses, very modest SAT scores. And we sat there, and I went through the usual routine of recommending perhaps other choices he might think about, and the Ferrum Junior College and so forth, because we would get kids from Ferrum every
Absolutely.
year. And he looked at me and leaned over and said, "Mr. Cox, I always know what I have wanted, and I always have done what I had to do to get what I wanted, and I plan to come to Randolph-Macon." So we took him. Okay. He came. He did okay. He decided he wanted to major in biology and go to medical school. He did not do too well in the intro biology course. He came back and took it over again. He passed it, but came back and took it again in the summer school and fought his way through the whole medical college preparation schedule, applied to 2 or 3 medical colleges, including MCV in Richmond, got turned down, got a job teaching science in a high school somewhere, applied to medical colleges again, got turned down, went through a 5-year process of being turned down at medical colleges because his MCAT scores were also low. Finally, MCV took him after 5 years. He went to MCV. He graduated on time. He is practicing medicine in his hometown as a general practitioner.
That's what makes what we do
so
meaningful and so worthwhile, to see the learning disabled students who come in and who thrive and prosper here. I have a somewhat similar story that, in fact, the president mentioned at our commencement exercises last year. So many students come to mind, and probably Ed, even today, can remember a dozen students that stand out in his mind, and I can as well. Paul Nyantaki, the student from Ghana, probably was, to me, the most memorable part of my experience here. Sitting in front of me, clothes on his back, driving a taxi cab in Washington, D.C., from Ghana, didn't have his complete records, but he was passionate about getting an education. Didn't have the money, didn't have the resources, but had the drive and had this kind of magnetic personality that said to you, if you give me a chance, I'm going to be successful. We gave him a chance, somehow cobbled together his records, which were spotty at best if we had them at all. And as you probably know, he went on, got a medical degree at Johns Hopkins, is now back in Ghana, has a series of clinics for indigent Ghanan citizens. And he, to me, is the prototype of what we do, and that is we give students a chance to show their potential, and if we invest in them, more often than not, they deliver. And I think he's a perfect example of that.
Oh, it's always interesting and fun to sit there and look at the incoming freshman class and realize how many students in our incoming freshman class who had been admitted to much more competitive schools than we were, but who chose to come to Randolph-Macon and loved it when they got here and did very well. And
even students for whom we were a second choice or a safety school, and that honestly is sometimes the case, more often than not, they became converts by the end of their first year to this kind of experience and what we had to offer, and the sense of community that we kind of just project. And you couldn't pry them out of here with a crowbar after a year. Even if it was a second choice, it ended up being the perfect choice for them.
I've got a reverse story on that. There's a young woman from suburban D.C. up in Maryland who came as an honor student and so forth, had a wonderful freshman year, enjoyed the school a whole lot, just stood out in class and everything. And that summer she decided she wanted just to keep on going to school, so she took a couple of summer school courses at the University of Maryland. And she came back in the fall of sophomore year and sat down with me and said, Mr. Cox, I love Randolph-Macon. I love the people here. I love the classes I have taken, and everything. It's just great. When I was across that campus, and I was completely anonymous, and I loved it. And she said, also there's so much to do, all the stuff in the university. And she said, so she transferred at the end of the first semester of her sophomore year.
Yeah.
And went on to graduate from the University of Maryland. She used to come back and visit several times a year, to her friends. She'd come by the office and speak to us and so forth. And she made the decision completely on her own for her own feelings and her own aspirations. And
it's kind of interesting and somewhat ironic that our biggest draw here, i.e. our size, is also to some extent our biggest obstacle.
Oh, sure.
And that is we attract a select number of students who want what we have to offer. There's a much larger cohort out there of students who they associate larger with more and varied and variety and so forth. And I also think that some students who come here because of the size, and this might be an example, end up kind of outgrowing it. They want, again, more stimulation, more variety, more selection and all of that, and they associate that with larger institutions. But there's a tremendous process of self-selection that goes on. When you choose Randolph-Macon, you make a deliberate choice because we are smaller than probably 80% of the high schools that they come out of, and they see something here that they do not see anywhere else. And I should say they may feel something here that they don't feel anywhere else.
Well, you lose 2 or 3 students a year to engineering school.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, but stories of individuals are what it's
all about. It's all about the people.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right.
I do want to hear about when the college went co-ed and the admission did.
Do we have several hours to talk?
When the admissions started that, I think would be interesting.
Okay. Shall I?
Please.
Okay, it was a period of time when many men's colleges and women's colleges also were going co-ed. And we put together a committee of trustees, of faculty, and students, 3 each, I think. And they were to go through the studies and make recommendations to the Board of Trustees. And the plan was, if I recall correctly, they were to make their recommendation to the board in the spring of 1971, and if then that was to go ahead, we would go ahead and go co-ed in 72. We would have a year plus to prepare and so change and so forth and so on. Well, in all college admissions, and especially in small private college admissions, you can't, the numbers change. Sometimes you start out high, wind up kind of low. Sometimes you start out low and it builds. Sometimes it's up, down, up, down, up, down. It's hard to tell. Mm-hmm. Well, in the fall of 1970, we started off pretty good, and then kind of things were kind of going down a little bit, about the middle of October or something like that. And so the committee at that point knew that its recommendation was going to be to go co-ed. We had studies from Washington Lee, we had studies from Lehigh, we had studies from all kinds of other schools, and so forth. And so they knew what their recommendation was going to be in the spring of 71. And I was sitting in my office on the Saturday morning of the board meeting in about the 3rd week in October. And Dean Mabry comes down to talk to me, and he says, "Ed, guess what? The committee knows what its recommendation is going to be, and the board is probably going to go with it," and so forth. It looks like we're going to. And I was really excited. Oh, this is great. And we chatted, and he said, "Wait a minute. You know they mean next fall, don't you?" This was when most of the college night programs were already done. Okay, all of that kind of, our little brochure said, Randolph-Macon College, the college for the individual man. And so forth, and you're thinking, and I said, "What?" And I almost fell on the floor. And he said, "But you can't tell anybody because they're going to have a special meeting in November to decide." Okay. So the first week in co-ed next fall, Jay Pace, the publications director at that time, we had prepared a mailing to every school to every student inquiry and applicant that we already had, and we had letters out to them and everything that we were going to go co-ed. We had stickers made that said, and for the individual woman too, and pasted them on front of all the brochures. This is serious.
Creativity.
And sent them out. And when the gavel fell on that Saturday in November, Jay and I jumped up, took boxes of stuff to the post office before noon to get them in the mail, and bingo. And my favorite story of this event, that was on Saturday at noon. We put the stuff in the post office. Jay had prepared news releases to hit the newspapers on Sunday, and would call them up and say, I'm going to call you to tell you whether to print it or not. So Saturday afternoon, he sat down and called all the newspapers that we had, and so forth. And it hit the newspapers, on the Sunday newspapers. Susan Bennett and her dad were outside my office at 5 minutes to 9 on Monday morning.
Oh, my God. My God.
And she was an extremely active alumni, and so forth.
Absolutely.
I'll never, ever forget that.
You can't help but mention the outcome of that first year.
Right.
What did they want? Did they want 50?
We wanted 50.
What was the outcome?
The outcome was we had about 36 freshmen and 15 or 16 transfers.
Yeah. You
So we met the goal in terms of numbers, right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And do you know what enticed those first women to come? Did they tell you why they came?
It was the experience of something changing, something new, verifying college that they would otherwise have been attracted to anyhow. That was the base of much of the conversations we went. Mm-hmm. And the fact, I could be one of the first ones, I could be the leader, I could do, was a part of the thinking of lots of students too.
Yeah.
And some had applied to, a number of them had applied to several colleges that had just recently gone co-ed and so forth. And but we had young women in that class who had been admitted to UVA, had been admitted to William and Mary, had been admitted to, West Hampton at the University of Richmond. And
I think the other parallel story to this is the evolution or the growth of minority students at Randolph-Macon College. Ed was kind of in on the front end of that. I inherited that goal, I guess, from Ed and from Chad Nelson, who succeeded Ed. Mm-hmm. But I can remember, and I'll let you take it back earlier, but I can remember in the 80s when it became a very specific goal of the admissions office, and where we would do all kinds of targeted, and this was a term that we hadn't used before, but instead of kind of, open the doors and they will come, we had to do outreach for targeted groups of students, and you had special recruiting tactics for minority students. We would do special fairs up and down the East Coast that attracted minority students. We would buy names of minority students from the College Board and do direct mail to them. We had things like van days for Richmond area schools where we literally would go down to Huguenot High School or go down to Thomas Jefferson or John Marshall and bring a van load of minority students up to campus for today and for the day and so forth. All this special outreach. I can remember in the 80s, maybe a couple of years, where I did not enroll an African-American student at Randolph-Macon College. And it warms my cockles today to see where we have hit now double figures. We've had 3 record minority enrollments in a row at Randolph-Macon, and we finally have reached, I guess, what I would call a critical enough mass where it's not a risk for a minority student to come here, whether it's Asian or Hispanic or African American, where there is a group here, there is a culture here, and so forth that they find very attractive. What was it like at the front end when you were kind of breaking ground in that, Ed? Because that was
it was one of the questions on our little question list today as we're comparing that to going co-ed and so forth. Entirely different for, because going co-ed was a change, puts you on a different list among colleges, puts you, complete change. Integrating the freshman class was an entirely different thing, because that was individual by individual.
Yep.
You go out, to seek an individual.
Right.
You respond to an individual. You treat that individual like an individual, and like you do every other applicant. Mm-hmm. And I will never forget a young African-American student from Northern Virginia, I think, who came down with his dad and spent a day on Thursday or a Friday going to classes and so forth and so on. And when they were getting ready to leave that afternoon, Dad came up to me and said, "Mr. Cox, I just want to thank you so much. My son was not treated as an African-American student. He was treated just like and accepted just like everyone else, so much different from the other colleges that we have visited and so forth. And I just want to thank you so much as Mr. We accepted him. He came. He did well, and so forth. And I think that's been the approach. If approach is the right word, I think that's the
Absolutely.
been the mentality of this college ever since. You treat an individual like an individual, like a person.
Yep. And that approach has paid dividends over the years. We've come light years from where we were in the late 70s and early 80s, where it was. And again, the one similarity is it's still one student at a time, working with them as individuals, showing them the best sides of Randolph-Macon College and how we can meet their needs. And whether it's, regardless of the ethnic background of a student, our approach is the same, and that is selling the value of this kind of education to meet their needs. And we've been fortunately successful.
Yeah,
even
you're up against competition.
Even in, 8 of our 10 top competitors, probably even then and today, are public institutions in Virginia, some with national reputation. So we have our work cut out for us. But there is something special in Hampton, Sydney, and now Roanoke is with Roanoke College and so forth. Right. But you have a Hampton, Sydney story?
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Storyteller.
Well, I have
no, he's
several of them. I was always very close friends with the Dean of Director of Admissions at Hampton, Sydney, and I think I'm not ever supposed to have to say this in public, but yes, we would get on the phone and talk about a particular applicant sometime, but never mind. I was on my way to a college night program in Westfield, New Jersey, which is an old town right across the river from Manhattan, and a wonderful little old place. And I was on my way, and we'd had some kids from that area. And I was on my way to a college night there. Got there early, went in the little square downtown into a pizza place and got a little something for supper, and still had time to kill, and went into a little card shop and so forth, and a drugstore next door to get some Rolaids for dessert, and stepped into a little card shop next to there, and card shop and stationery store and so forth. This young woman was in there putting stuff up on the shelves and everything. There was nobody else in there, and I was just kind of looking around at the books and so forth. And she spoke to me, and I responded, and she said something else. And she said, "Excuse me, I have to ask, where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Virginia." "Where in Virginia?" I said, "From Ashland." And she said, "Ashland, Virginia? Oh, we lived in Ashland when my husband was a student at Randolph-Macon."
Oh my golly!
And I said, "How do you do?" And he was not a student when I was working here, but knew my cousin Jim Cox and and all this kind of stuff. And we were having this delightful conversation, and this older lady stepped out from behind a rack of cards and said, "Well, my husband was from Danville, Virginia, but he went to Hampden, Sydney." And we were the only 3 people in this card shop in Westfield, New Jersey. Right.
Oh, that's great.
And, but, wonderful, friendly rivalry.
Oh. Then, now, and hopefully always. It's a tremendous for both schools.
Right.
Yep.
I want you to have a chance to tell Dr. Moreland's story. Some memories of, was Dr. Moreland still here when you came?
Oh, he hired me. Only applicant for, I'm not even sure, because Bill Robinson called me and said, "Ed, we think we're going to split the office up in because I was doing college counseling in private schools in those days, and I may have been the only, I probably was, but Dr. Mullen, yes, all right, and I don't know whether you have heard others attempt to imitate Dr. Mullen's presentation, speech, and so forth. He talked like this, very, very formal. And, the story I told a minute ago was about World War II veterans coming back and so forth. And when I was a student in the early 50s, I was on the Panhellenic Council. We had to meet with Dr. Mullen every fall, and we would discuss the whole matter of fraternities and decide that, yes, there was a drinking problem, an alcohol problem in fraternities, and yes, Dr. Mullen, we were going to do something about it, and yes, gentlemen, that would be very good, and so on. Gentlemen, but you just don't remember what it was like when those veterans came back after the war. That was an experience he had never had before. The college had never really had anything like that before.
Wow.
But
so by the time you were a student in 1950, the Special Army students were gone by that point. Is that?
yes, yeah, that group had that special program was no longer in effect. But as I think I told you, my older sister used to date those guys, so I knew some of them. And
one of the special treats of my early days at Randolph-Macon in the early 80s, Dr. Mullen was not the president any longer, but he was still around.
Oh, yes.
And I used to wander into what is now Macon Coffee, and I forget what we called it then, but he would be periodically having lunch, and I would sit down and join him, and basically he regaled me with stories about Randolph-Macon in the old days and gave me a sense of history that I didn't live through myself. But just breaking bread with him a few times during the year, I learned so much about the history of this place, and just a wonderful sense of memory of the past and remembrances, and it was a delightful experience. So Ed kind of lived through it, but I kind of caught him at the end of his days, but it was still a treat.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, he retired. He hired me, and then he retired a year or two later, and that's when Luther came in. Mm-hmm. Luther White came in, and then later Liddell Payne.
Liddell Payne hired me when Liddell was here. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, but Luther was president during the decision to go co-ed. Right. And which was a shock to him also, I think. But never mind Luther, great. Right,
You mentioned that Mr. Cox hired you. Do you start to tell about how you happened to come to Randolph-Macon, what you were doing before?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I was... I kind of took the roundabout way to Virginia, but I'm from upstate New York, and after I graduated with my graduate degree from Ohio State, I went to work for Xerox Corporation in Rochester for a couple years as an educational consultant. I kind of segued from that to a large urban community college in Rochester called Monroe Community College, where I was teaching English as an adjunct professor and also working in the admissions office. It's often said that you don't get jobs out of the Chronicle of Higher Ed, but the next two jobs that I got were out of the Chronicle of Higher Ed. A job at Virginia State University down in Petersburg, historically black institution, came open. It was a federally funded project tied in with what they called the Virginia Plan, which was, I guess, in effect, we're bringing more minority students to white institutions and more white students to historically black institutions. I came down, interviewed, got that job, and spent 2 years at Virginia State. During that time, I traveled a lot, met Ed off and on the road. We probably shared the podium together a few times, talking at programs and so forth. And just fortuitously, I saw that a position came open at Randolph-Macon. I knew Ed, had great respect for him, and loved his stories. I wanted to hear more of his stories. So when the job came open, it was in the Chronicle. I applied for that, and the rest, as they say, is history. In terms of, apparently they didn't have any other applicants either because they hired me.
And the phone rang.
And the phone, and I went to a small undergraduate college, and I wanted to be a bigger fish and represent a college that I could relate. And 29 years later, that has not changed. The sense of this place and the sense of what this place is about has not changed.
29 years ago?
1980 was the year that you hired me. And then I worked for Ed for a year, and then I worked for Chad Nelson, Charles F. Nelson Jr.
Right.
Succeeded Ed for 4 years, and then in 1985 I became the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid and held that until 2006. But part of it was just the attraction of the job. Part of it was the fact that I knew Ed and knew how well respected he was, and what he did at Randolph-Macon was just among the fraternity of people that we travel with in the admissions business, and that was an attraction for me as well.
And you liked my jokes.
And I liked his jokes, right. And I still have the same desk today that Ed gave me back in 1980, probably with the same pile of papers on it that I had in 1982. But anyhow, that's the long-winded version of how I got here.
Of course, it was not a new desk then.
No, and I could. No, that's for sure.
Any final thoughts or memories you'd like to share?
Nothing comes to mind. Ed, did you?
One of the questions that you all sent out that we were supposed to talk about is, how do I view the difference between what the college was like when I was a student here and what it was like when I came back and began to work here and so forth. And my initial response is hardly any change at all. My thoughtful response is, gee, it really is different, because the world world changes over time anyhow. But we were, in my days, we were one of those little old, small, all men's liberal arts colleges. And the supposed regulation of the Methodist Church was much stronger in those days, and particularly regarding the consumption of alcohol, and for which we were very famous, and in many ways. And I can remember standing on the front porch of the old Fire Cap House, and we were all on a Saturday night big party and all that kind of stuff, and we realized that behind the big oak tree across the street back of the church watching us was Dean Mabry. He was checking out to see. So we waved at him. But,
Oh, that's great. That's great.
But no, it was wonderful then. You had very strong faculty. And the in-class experience then, and the in-class experience in a smaller college, is the critical factor of its part of its educational opportunity. It's not like sitting in a class with 350 people watching a TV screen or something, and or sitting with your little laptop in the bar somewhere, working on your chemistry class. It's
In recent years, we interviewed, just to pick up on Ed's thought, we interviewed alumni from a variety of different decades who went to Randolph-Macon College, and asked them the question, and I don't remember the exact words, but what is the essence of Randolph-Macon? Why do you think Randolph-Macon is special? And almost without exception, and they might have used different words, but almost without exception, they said, my relationships with my professors. Professor so-and-so changed my life. Dr. so-and-so came to visit me when I broke my leg. Dr. so-and-so got me out of bed when I overslept for an exam. The relationship between students and faculty, to me, is almost, and no matter whether it was 50 years ago or last May, that notion of student-faculty relationships, a sense of connection that we have picked up on as part of our, kind of our trademark, language and so forth, is the one common denominator that I don't think has changed. We've doubled the number of buildings, and we've added majors, and we've added faculty, and done lots of things, and we have the internet now. But I think that fundamental relationship, that interaction day to day, and the opportunity to, as we say, maximize students' potential, to help them to be all that they can be, is the one common denominator that I don't think has changed, certainly during my tour of duty here.
I'm with you on that, John. You put it very, very beautifully. And working as assistants in the admissions office, at one point in time, I can quickly remember 3 people who were associate in the admissions office, who were Randolph-Macon alumni, each one of whom had been admitted to 2 or 3 other much more competitive colleges, but chose to come to Randolph-Macon. That was obviously one of the things that helped them get hired.
Right.
But and they had the kind of approach and basically intellectual picture of the college that we have been talking about in the experience.
Absolutely.
And it's like one more quick little story. I had an appointment at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, I think, with a young man, student in a very competitive prep school, private school up in Northern Virginia. He arrived with his dad, and his dad explained to me that they had just put Randolph-Macon on the list. Shop as they come down, their real goal was either William and Mary or University of Richmond. Going to him and said, "I'm going to spend the whole day." He had 3 or 4 appointments during that day, you know. And they came in Randolph-Macon. We did the interview with him, and he went out with a student on a tour. He decided he wanted to sit in on a class. He spent the day at Randolph-Macon, made his dad call and cancel all the other appointments, went back home, applied early decision, and we took him. He came, and he was happy. A good student,
For 29 years, the deal maker, as far as I'm concerned in marketing, Randolph-Macon has been convincing students to visit the campus because once they come here, the college sells itself. There is just something, as I say, intangible. It's a feeling. They walk around the campus, and it's always funny because a family from New York City, for example, will come, and it's a different world down there or up there. They'll walk around the campus and 50 strangers will say good morning to them or good afternoon to them, and they're not used to that. They're a little bit wary of that, but that is the culture of Randolph-Macon College. There's something about it that sells itself. And to this day, the secret to our success can be measured by the number of students that we have been able to convince to come to campus and take a look for themselves. And as Ed says, sit in on a class, talk to a coach, have lunch in the dining hall. That'll make or break you right there.
Right.
But immerse. And in fact, we even created probably 10 years ago or 12 years ago a thing called Macon Days, and we do a number of those each year. Literally a student can come and be a student for a day at Randolph-Macon College and kind of immerse himself in the life of the college and be treated like a regular student.
Yeah,
be hosted by one of our
the
kids.
PSOPs.
Yeah, you're right.
Which is prospective
student orientation programs. But in addition to those open houses or the PSOPs, we also just did this where you could come on a Monday or Friday and be a student. And I will tell you, just from kind of an administrative point of view, the conversion, if you will, the number of students who participate, who end up applying, being accepted and enrolled, it ends up being one of the best things that we do. And I think it just relates back to what Ed has said, and that is the college has a special aura that sells itself.
Oh, it's like, here I go. I can't remember her name. But a young woman from D.C., anyhow, someone came, and she told me later on that she came and she spent the day. And she said, I went to class, I went to lunch, I did all the usual kind of stuff in there. She said, at the end of the day, I was by myself. And I stood in the middle of the class, and those students were walking down to the dining hall, and I said, I could see myself with those people going there. I could see myself with those people walking into the library over there. I could see myself doing that, and that.
It's like the student who said to me, Dean Conkright, I went to bed, and after a lot of thought, I went to bed and I said, I'm going to William and Mary. I woke up in the morning, and the first thing out of my mouth was Randolph-Macon College. It was an emotional reaction, not an intellectual one, but that's what tipped the balance. And she said it was almost like an involuntary response, but the first thing out of my mouth was Randolph-Macon. So that's kind of how we do business, and it works well for us.
Thank you very much. It's nice to hear from you all about the front end and the prospective students and how they come here. It's a valuable part of our Macon memories. Thank you.